Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, the SNIA Cloud Object Storage Test Tools, an open source industry interoperability project. My name is Adam Gray. I'm chair of the newly founded Cloud Object Storage Test Tools work group within SNIA. My day job is principal engineer for IBM Cloud Object Storage. I'll be facilitating today's call with Matt Benjamin, program director at IBM Ceph Storage. Hey, Matt, how are you?
Doing great, thank you.
And with Rick Wheeler, VP of Software Engineering at Versity Software. Thanks for joining us today, Rick. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you.
Before we get started, I want to briefly point out that this webinar is presented as part of the Cloud Object Storage Technologies group within SNIA, which is responsible for education and raising awareness of topics such as COS API interoperability issues. Additionally, the CST helped organize and promote two SNIA Cloud Object Storage Plugfests and the new test tools effort, which we'll both talk about during today's webinar. Encourage you to join the CST and other SNIA groups that you're interested in to help promote these important activities. Just want to talk a little bit about SNIA. The SNIA community is a large group. There's over 200 industry organizations comprising of 2,000 active contributing members and 50,000 participating IT end users and storage experts worldwide. SNIA works to develop global standards and to deliver education on all technologies related to data. And I just have to go over the SNIA legal notice real quick. This provides SNIA's copyright right regarding use of the material. There are no warranties expressed and implied. If you want to reference this material, please do so at your own risk. You can download a copy of this presentation using the interface for this live webinar. The interface also allows you to submit questions during the talk and rate this presentation at the conclusion. We really appreciate the questions and feedback, and we will be answering questions at the end. So today, Matt, Rick, and myself are going to discuss the SNIA COS Plugfest, the new SNIA COS Test Tools technical work group, and how both of those events and activities intersect with the open source interoperability testing. After our discussion, we'll have an informal Q&A session, which you can submit your questions through the web interface. If we can't cover all the questions during this session, we will answer all questions in a Q&A blog, which will be posted a few weeks after this webinar. So first, I'd like to go over the SNIA COS Plugfest. If you're not aware of what a Plugfest is, it's essentially when organizations implementing some sort of interface, physical or software, get together to test interoperability between them. SNIA had a lot of success with the SMB Plugfests and recently has ventured into Cloud Object Storage Plugfests. The Plugfest is a face-to-face event. It helps to build a lot of developer network, especially for Cloud Object Storage and the de facto interface of S3, and helps to deal with a lot of the interoperability issues. SDC 2024 was the first Plugfest that was in Santa Clara, California. Most of the participants were COS storage providers. It was co-located with the SDC conference, so it's valuable. You can go to the conference, you can get some testing done. You get to meet people within your own industry and in the larger storage industry. We had a lot of success there. You can see some of the logos on the slide. We had really a great first showing, and it happened over 3 days, the entire duration of SDC, and the biggest kind of takeaway from the initial Plugfest was, one, it's really valuable to get us all in the same room so we can talk about things. It's a vendor neutral environment. It happens under NDA, so you can really talk about stuff that you wouldn't particularly talk about with potentially your competition. But this one is really there to advance the interest of the industry as a whole and the customer experience. The second big takeaway was a need for independent and community-driven test tools. All of the organizations had their own set of tools, some proprietary, some open source. None of them had comprehensive coverage of the API. So with that knowledge in hand, we began undertaking some investigative efforts about, is SNIA the right place to do this test tools collaboration, and how does that help with the Plugfest? It's about 6 months after the initial, we had a second Plugfest that was in Denver. We added about 4 new vendors during that one, and we had a lot of structured discussions around Cloud Object Storage test tools and the technical work group that would come out of it. And now up in September, during SDC 2025, we're going to hold another Plugfest, and we hope to help evolve the actions of the Cloud Object Storage test tool work group. So let me expand on this a little bit. So the landscape as it exists, we're focusing on the S3 API. It's the de facto standard for object storage. There are many providers and many deployment strategies: cloud, hybrid, on-prem, multi-cloud, containerized. It's quite a variety of different providers. This isn't solely on-prem. This isn't solely cloud. We found that customers expect that if you're using an S3 API, that it should work the same regardless of implementation. Or customers aren't even aware of backend storage because they may be buying a product from a third-party vendor, or using they may be doing something that isn't storing data. They may be doing data science, data analysis, AI workflows, and it just happens to be that that is built upon S3 object storage. Mass adoption means that you can't really rely on yourself for all testing. It's incredibly expensive, and it's a broad API. And although we all have different strategies, they can be inconsistent across products, and generally one organization can't test all of the other ones. So SNIA can offer some benefits in this case. Since it's a vendor neutral environment, we can make it easier for cloud storage platforms, ISVs, open source, to adapt to user requirements by developing or promoting certain open source tools, strategies. It can lower your support costs, and it can certainly eliminate bugs. With every Plugfest, we find 1 or 2 things that hits multiple vendors, and those generally get resolved the same day. And it helps drive industry consistency. And by consistency, I mean consistency in terms of the outcomes for customers and end users. And, that is really apparent because users care mostly about reliability, stability, and how their data, they want their data, and they want it now, and they need it to comply with worldwide landscapes. So this test tools technical work group, we have kind of a short roadmap here on the right. Right now, we're in this first phase. We've been approved by the SNIA board. This work group is open to SNIA members only. Non-members may eventually contribute to open source software efforts via the contributor license agreement. But the goal is to expand and improve interoperability. Right now, we're in the research and assessment stage. We're going to assess the state of open source cloud object storage testing, identify what tools do what, and if there are holes in coverage gaps that might need to be developed as a SNIA project. or if there's ways to direct developer focus into existing tools which have a large user base and would intrinsically gain the benefits across the board. And so, speaking on that, I'm here to introduce Matt Benjamin. Matt Benjamin is going to talk to us about Ceph's open source S3 API testing and how that can inform the community and the test tools working group. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so I'm just going to speak just briefly on the Ceph S3 test. As a Ceph contributor, first these are one of the S3 test tools that we've had at both of the first two Plugfests that that SNIA has offered. As a Ceph contributor, I'm an author of a modest number of these tests, so I'm going to speak to them from that perspective. And I've been helping to deliver them at the two Plugfests. Let me find what the. So first of all, I want to talk about just what they are. They're a native S3 API test suite for Ceph object storage, but broadly they're applicable to any S3 endpoint. But they originated in Ceph. They were created by our early project to guide our implementation and as a regression test suite. They're currently written in Python. They're written in Python. They're using the PyTest framework currently. Previously, we used Nodes, which was it's sort of the precursor in this Python community. They're implemented using the Boto 3 SDK currently, and there's with a very small amount of extension. They just do what the SDK allows us to do. So that brings us to the test model. It's fundamentally black box testing. The tests are written in terms of S3 results and reply headers. We can add custom headers. We can test. We're able to test what the API can show us. We don't look through to our backend implementation in any of this particular testing. We have other test frameworks to do that. It's worth noting that there's a fairly significant historical community around S3 tests. We're aware of a great number of commercial and open source developers or developer communities that have used S3 tests at one time or another, so we're probably using them today. There are a great many old forks of S3 tests that we're aware of. And there are also upstream contributions. We've not been very good historically in the Ceph project at incorporating upstream contributions that we probably should have. And there's a backlog of contributions. We would like to change that. Just talking a little bit about what they actually contain. They consist of basically 6 broad modules covering the S3 API, of which we have 714 unit tests, a small number of SNS tests that are useful for interacting with S3 bucket notifications, so we can create SNS compatible topics, list them, and so forth. We have a fairly good coverage of STS. We have our own STS implementation and stuff, so we need that. We have a fairly robust implementation of S3 Select, so we have tests related to that. We support IAM accounts and are adding more capabilities. Let me go one more. 87 tests related to that, and some common stuff. This work in progress on these, they've been continuously a work in progress, but I want to mention some things that are going on. We've been working with the IBM COS team to start integration of a bunch of their Boto 3 based tests into S3 tests. And they're an open source test suite. We'd like to invite more participation in this. So I wanted to speak a little about what's there. Over the last few years, we've been improving the formal organization, but there's more to do. We have roughly 58 groupings of tests by functional area, and we have a support that's in sort of incubating support for selecting behavior by the coverage by different backends or environments. We think there's more work to be done to map and prioritize the coverage and understand what's complete and what's incomplete. we'd like to, and most importantly, we've never had in the Ceph community a way or a framework to do organized interop testing with other implementations besides Ceph, and that would be important if we're going to make them more broadly available, we think. So we've never figured out how to make sure that they continue to run against particular backends that aren't Ceph, and fix regressions and so forth. I think that's the main thing. There's still a few there's still some dumb things. There's still some backlog of old work, like removing a small amount of Boto2 dependencies and things like that. But that's mainly what I can say there. And I'll pass this now to Rick Wheeler, who will talk a little bit about the testing environment that Versity uses.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm at Versity, which is a much smaller company than IBM, but we also have our own S3 server, the Versity Gateway, which is an open source project, and roughly 400 tests to help validate our implementation, all under the Apache 2.0 license. We used a slightly different approach, but kind of similar spirit to what Matt was describing. So we code the test up in basically bats using shell scripting with S3 API calls, as mentioned on the slide. The second group is through REST APIs, and then the kind of higher level gateway, Versity Gateway specific SDK tests are coded in Golang and are slightly less generic, but should apply to most servers as well. If you want to have a look at those tests, there's a pointer to the repo here on this slide. Comments, feedback on them is very welcome. There should be a lot of documentation in the repo about how to set it up and how to use it. And as Matt mentioned, we did get together at both of the Plugfest, and it was great. I mean, we were booked solid. I think it was a full 3 days running our test suite against everybody who had interest and stayed quite busy. Ran, for example, Matt's test against our implementation, and it was great to see what we could uncover. And just talking a little bit more about the motivation as a vendor who's been in the storage business for a very long time, every client and every server, as your engineers go through and they code to what you see as the required API, you're going to do it a little differently, right? And when you code your own test, you don't necessarily think about things that you might have gotten wrong, or you wouldn't have coded them incorrectly to begin with. So having someone else write test according to that same API from a non-coder's point of view gives you a chance to have a more kind of adversarial approach to testing your code, and it's really valuable, right? Because you won't have overlooked the same set of things, right? So we actually found quite a lot of good stuff that way. And I think Adam pointed out as well, this is actually hugely beneficial for our mutual customers. Because end users want to make sure that if they take their S3 workload, they can go to any of these vendors, and it makes that process much smoother for them by providing this well-tested foundation for S3, which is good for the market as well, I think, of S3 storage providers. These are community-based tools. Anybody can use them anywhere. You don't need to be an open source server to use open source test. There's no implication of the license on you, but as always, talk to your lawyer if you're worried about that kind of stuff. But people use these open source tests against a lot of different non-open source implementations. Oh, and in a similar way, Versity's also, we have a client of S3 as well, because we're an archiving tool, so we can archive out to other servers. So, we are both a client and server in different aspects of our product. Ultimately, what comes out of testing is we validate that we implemented something that complies with the APIs we agree as a community. It's not really looking into the details of how you implemented your server. As Matt mentioned, we have other tests that go into that kind of things, architectural assumptions about how our Versity Gateway works. If you think about what a test run shows up with, you should have pass, fail, and maybe not implemented, right? There are some people who choose to implement a subset of S3, and that should be clearly called out. There is, though, some knock-on effect. If you choose not to implement some part of the specification because you think you don't need it, if you think about user kind of use cases or workflows, kind of these user profiles, you have to provide a certain set of these APIs that function together. So that's another thing that we're looking to build up, is kind of these flows through the test suite that will be more than just a point test, but more a validation of a certain use case or a workflow. Again, I think it's really powerful to be able to benefit from the work other testing engineers have provided for us. And the last thing I'll throw in here is, in our last Denver Plugfest, our lead test engineer joined us remotely from Brazil. So he dialed in and ran the test remotely. We're working to figure out as a community and as a team how to use that remote testing operability before we meet face to face. And you can actually preload a lot of that work before you show up. So if I start running against the Ceph test the week before Plugfest, when I get to the face-to-face session, I can do the actual engineering discussions with Matt and team and other people to dig into the more interesting stuff than just the potentially time-consuming run of test itself. With that, I think I'm going to hand back to Adam.
Thanks, Rick. I really am glad that you mentioned the fact that, the size differential and some of the advantage of participating in both the test tools work group and the Plugfests. It turns out there's an advantage for small organizations, as if you're developing a new project or have a kind of niche API that you may eventually expand to different things in the future, you get to benefit from the work of larger organizations and the broader community as a whole. But on the other side of the coin, as you're a cloud provider or a very large storage vendor, you most likely have so many customers and so many situations in which you will probably run into the same sort of issues that these smaller companies might, especially when it's in a more specialized area. So there's really a two-way trade-off there, and it ends up benefiting everybody. So this slide here, I wanted to go over the idea of expanding this ecosystem. Rick and Matt both talked about their open source test tooling. And that stuff is available right now. The links are in the slides, and I encourage you to go take a look. And if you use those tools, I encourage you to also consider contributing back. But part of the test tools technical working group is going to be looking at what the roles of specific tools are within the S3 ecosystem. The focus currently is on interoperability. There's lots of other tools that exist, performance, etc. And interoperability is the current focus. Right now, a lot of the work is either compliance with the de facto S3 API or S3 to S3 API operations from one vendor to another, such as a university as a archiving solution or a backup solution. But we have, there are other APIs. We've had a lot of testing by organizations within the Plugfests that might be going from any S3 API provider to their internal proprietary APIs, or to a different type of standard API, such as Swift or CDMI. And we're seeing a lot of demand for cross-technology interoperability. It's kind of the golden goose in terms of storage, is how can I have all of my storage be in the same place on various APIs. So object to file, or object to block, or now even databases with attached blobs may use the S3 API internally. And so we're seeing more interest in that kind of testing. As mentioned, there's a lot of organizations that may integrate existing open source tools in their enterprise testing. My organization, IBM Cloud Object Storage, as Matt mentioned, uses a subset of the Ceph S3 tests in our CI pipeline. And part of that is why we want to kind of combine forces and try to contribute back some of our tests to make that better, because there are certainly cases where we have additional coverage for areas that they may not. And another kind of adjacent point is, if you have an S3 tool that you use for interoperability testing or for performance testing or something, one of the goals for this effort is to ask you to contribute them out to the community as an open source tool. I understand that can be difficult, but I'm trying to, as chair of the test tools technical work group, and just as a member of the community, encourage you to do so. I think we've identified a lot of the advantages to working together on S3 interoperability. And part of that is our commitment to you, as we wish to develop novel tools when we identify the need in the ecosystem as it exists. But the number one goal of our efforts is to create a better experience for customers and end users. We're using the collective knowledge of the SNIA Cloud Object Storage community. We're trying to assess what exists, what doesn't, how we can best focus. And a part of that is, if there's an existing open source tool, such as the Ceph S3 test suite, which exists, has broad adoption, we want to be good citizens, and we're going to try to encourage people to improve that instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and create our own package. I think it's a huge win if end users of existing open source tools can simply update their packages without even knowledge of this and benefit from, the work of our collective teams around the world. So moving on from that, I did want to plug the SNIA SDC conference. I mentioned it earlier. It is in mid-September in Santa Clara, California. We have a preliminary agenda there at that link. There's an entire track of Cloud Object Storage. I will be there both at the Plugfest and at SDC, and hope to meet a lot of new people this year. Strongly encourage attending both SDC and the COS Plugfest if you have a product. And so with that, I want to first thank Matt and Rick for their insights, transition on to our question and answer session, where we'll take as many questions as we can from the audience. We have a couple of questions here. First one, we will go with kind of the elephant in the room, which is Amazon participating in this activity, and how should they benefit? And I'll take this one because I've answered this before. We believe that the SNIA efforts share the same customer excellence goals as AWS. We've invited them to participate in the Plugfest and the Cloud Object Storage Test Tools community. And we hope to see them potentially attend SDC this year and establish those lines of communication throughout the industry. We recognize that we all have to partner together as the API, the customers expect the excellence across the ecosystem. And we need to get support not only from providers, from vendors, but from those developing SDKs or other additional open source tools, and improve just the entire, they do a great job, obviously. I've been working on S3 for almost 15 years at this point, and we want to contribute back to that, especially in areas where we think we can fill the gaps. Matt or Rick, do you have any thoughts on AWS's participation?
I'll just add, I think, I'm not AWS affiliated, but I think this is all going to make them happier, make their customers happier, right? So I think S3 testing interoperability helps them, the ecosystem that they founded with AWS objects, even richer and easier for customers to grow and be pulled into. So I would be excited to have them come.
Great. I have another question from the audience here. Are there any aspects of the tests that examine the security of implementations? I will first, I did state that there is the interoperability focus, but I think both Matt and Rick probably could answer this question more in terms of how their teams deal with security in their product.
Well, I can speak to the S3 test. I mean, and it's really just about fidelity to the AWS request signing and other security infrastructure rules, as well as at rest and on the wire encryption. So it's really a matter of API conformance. We don't provide tests that introspect beyond that.
Yeah, and just to build on what Matt says, behind the wall of the API, there's how you implemented your server, right? And you're still responsible as an engineering team to go through all the normal security validation and testing that's very implementation specific, right? So I think, as Matt says, validate that you implemented the API to the right security protocols and support everything required. And second job, which isn't part of this, is validate that you don't have any major faux pas with your implementation security-wise.
But I mean that include, that's right. I mean that include the APIs include use of TLS. They include a request signing regime with AWS v4 signatures that has known security properties and uses known message authentication digests. There's an encryption set of encryption models that are supported with it in the SS3 in the SSE system. Our test suites validate those as well.
Yeah, I want to add on to that as well. I think the AWS team has done a fairly excellent job with, from an API perspective, of the security focus. Obviously, there are some use cases that might require more secure encryption methods that may not be available as a default, and I'm sure that other vendors have additional. There's also kind of the difficult question within, especially from a cloud provider, of, well, where does storage end and other things begin? If you're using something like server-side encryption, where the keys are provided by some sort of, other security service, that is obviously a point where security is a massive implication. And from the API's perspective, it's fine. It's always on the implementer's mind to make sure that there's not something that they're missing. A lot of, since it's a de facto API, you have to poke around in a lot of black box testing, trying to find the edges of things. And a big concern for me is ensuring that you're not incidentally leaking information that might be valuable to an attacker through error messages, through logging, those kind of things. And that is a very diverse part of how different vendors might handle things. You can return the right error code and other things, but some may be more descriptive than others. Some may adhere exactly to what Amazon returns. Another security aspect, and this is kind of just the reality of the situation. The S3 API is very stable, but it is based on XML, and those XML libraries are constantly being, there's lots of CVEs for different XML things. And that's kind of something that you have to follow as a implementer. And we hope that with AWS's like a participation in the community, we may be able to expand the API in new directions that might make it more secure for both, integrations with stuff like that, have not necessarily having to have an XML parsing library in your software stack. I guess we have another question, a real short one. Can we elaborate more on the remote testing, like how that went? Is that something that we're going to offer for SDC Plugfest? Rick, do you want to talk about the remote testing a little more and how that helped?
So we ended up having, as I mentioned earlier, the person who led our testing for the Denver Plugfest was actually doing it from Brazil, so relatively remote, and it worked quite well, right? I mean, a lot of the people in Denver specifically did not bring servers to set up in the venue itself, so you were basically testing against remote endpoint, just like the people on site. You do miss some of the on-site discussion and kind of the casual camaraderie that you have around there in the NDA session, but you are under the same rules, which is kind of like the Fight Club rules, right? What goes on inside that closed room is not leaked out to outside, so it's not meant to embarrass anyone. We set up, I forgot, did we use Slack? Was it a Slack channel?
Yeah.
So Slack was the tool we used to reach out to the remote person, and that was pretty good. I do think, it's definitely a trade-off. It's better to be in person. But the other thing that we thought about coming out of that was, as I mentioned earlier as well, is that you can do some of these runs before you get to the face-to-face, right? So, we're debating how much we can front-load some of the actual test runs so that we use our face-to-face time for more strategic discussions and kind of group debugging of runs as well. Right, so I think overall it's a really good tool to have in our toolkit to enable people to participate remotely. It helps take off the pressure for travel. There's a lot of people who have expressed concerns about traveling these days for all kinds of reasons, and that means that you can still take part if you can't get to the event itself.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on that a little more, that one of the goals potentially is that if we, like you said, is largely manual. We had a Slack, we had some open calls to, have discussions. It's not the same as being there in person. I think we all know that if you attended a conference virtually during COVID or something like that, it's not the same, but we're trying to make this a better, experience and learning each time from our experiences. But one of the goals of the test tools effort is to allow you to do this testing on your own at any time. And you'll have 90% of the coverage or whatever if we end up getting like a really good suite going. And then when we're in person in the Plugfest, we can talk about the really, the hard stuff, or the issues that you'd already found beforehand, or the like I had mentioned, the kind of fuzzy edge of the S3 API and where it starts talking to other things. Where does the cloud end and where do others services begin, is something that's constantly on our mind. It's not as easy as it was in the past with SMB or other kind of storage protocols. That's very contained to that surface. And now as compute and storage start to merge, we really it is a difficult conversation to have. So I think that and by we only have 3 days in person, and the more testing we can do beforehand, the better we can be with our time at the Plugfest itself, having those discussions, both structured and kind of the hallway track, as people say, and also going and attending talks of your interest at the SDC presentations or presenting yourself. So I think that remote testing is something that we're really interested in doing, and we're also really interested in working. So yeah, I guess I think we have time for one final.
I'll just highlight it, Adam, that that hallway track is actually one of the really valuable things of being there face to face, right? So you have the actual testing and all that, the actual purpose, but talking to other people who've been in this S3 implementation business is incredibly interesting and useful, and you learn a lot.
Yeah, I think just in this call, we've all been doing stuff in storage for a long time. Like I mentioned, 15 years of S3, pretty much S3 object storage. And you find that it is a massive industry, but fairly small. There's a lot of people that know each other, and there's a lot of value to getting to know those people. And, we're allowed to, in the Plugfest, have those discussions of asking, why did you make that decision? And sometimes the reasons may surprise you. And that helps understanding, because if you understand the why and you're testing against it, it's so much easier to really think about, the soft edges of things. Yeah. So, and then the last question is it's a good one, is who should participate? And that's a good question. Like, we've talked a lot about storage from a service and like a storage provider perspective, but I think that we're really calling for anyone that kind of touches the S3 API, and that's obviously clients, open source, SDK developers, vendors that integrate S3 as part of their stuff. We really want to know as many use cases as possible. From my perspective as a cloud provider, we don't really have the luxury of, stating a workflow. We just put it out there and people connect. And so obviously, for selfish reasons, I'm very much interested in as many varieties of S3 uses as possible. But what about from you guys?
I think that was well put, Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I didn't want to take up all the space, but I guess we'll answer any remaining questions in the blog posts, because we're running short on time. I want to thank both Matt and Rick for joining me. Thank the audience, especially. Just want to remind everybody to rate the webinar. It's really important for us to get the feedback. It'll allow you to do this after the presentation. And we can create better material and have more interesting topics in this area and many others. You can download this from the SNIA Educational Library. And like I mentioned, the Q&A blog will follow up in a few weeks on snia.org/blog. And you can follow us on LinkedIn and on X for future webinar dates and other important SNIA-related information. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.